Members, good afternoon. Good morning. We've formed a quorum. May I call the meeting to order? This is the subcommittee to study the promotion of national and national security education. Since the last meeting, myself, the deputy chairman, and also the education meeting had a meeting at 8 a.m. On the 13th of July, 13th of July. Now, I want to thank the secretary in particular because it was not easy to put together a meeting. So I like to update you on some of the time slots we have identified. I have already relayed members' concern to the administration at the meeting and also issues we'd like to discuss. Please refer to Appendix 2 for items that we would like to discuss. And let's go through the items together. So we've got CDMO of the list covered today. I'm sure you've all got that list of concerns. There are 19 items, and we've divided them into 4 categories. And please distribute the items to the members first. First is a promotion of national and national security education to the 4 KGs. And they are what we're going to discuss today. And the second, teacher training and professional requirements or qualifications, and also implementation, and also monitoring at school level. Items 10, 13, and 15 on the original list. The third category is promotion of national and national security education in the community. The Home Affairs and Youth Bureau, Security, and the CMAB and relevant bureaus will also be involved. We suggest that the Education Bureau can coordinate for us. And this relates to item 1, 3, 17 through 19 of our original list. The fourth area is the research and of national and national security education in post-secondary schools. That is originally items 6 to 9 of our list. We've also suggested that the research services division of the council to prepare a research paper for us or study paper for us on national and national security education in other countries. Hopefully, they can give us a report, and then later on the report will be given to members for information. The Research Services Division has already started its work as requested by the subcommittee. It is going to research into the experience in the promotion of national and national security education in the U.S. and Singapore. And then in March 2020, the Research Services Division also prepared an information digest on national education in Singapore and Japan, paper IN 07/1920. I believe most of the members here were not yet counselors back then, so you can approach our secretariat through your offices to get a copy of the paper. And because things have changed in the world, and we've asked the Research Services Division to update its paper and to include the situation of the U.S. as well. So I believe you've all got the paper on the major areas of study just tabled, right? And also available time slot for meeting in 2022. As you may already know, many subcommittees under panels have been activated, and we are all competing for meeting time slots. So we have tentatively scheduled 3 meetings for 2022, the 25th of October, the 22nd of November, and the 13th of December in 2022. And I expect to meet at least 6 times. So in January, February, and March 2023, I believe we are going to meet as well. The 17th of May is the time for us to complete the report of this subcommittee. So we need to allow time for the secretariat to work, and once the draft report is available, it will be circulated to members. From past experience, we will need at least 2 weeks. That means you have to return all your views to us by mid-April. So the schedule is very tight. I'm sure the community and various sectors are very concerned about the work of this subcommittee. So we must be efficient. If you have any view, whether it is on the contents of our meeting or areas for the administration to study, do let us know, and we can then communicate with the administration. In view of the concerns from different sectors of the community, I hope that your views can be forwarded to the secretariat within April. So 6 meetings may not be enough. Unless you all come prepared, you can also provide written submissions so as to facilitate the understanding of the administration and the secretariat. Or after you have spoken at a particular meeting and if you would like to elaborate on your points, you can give us a written supplementary paper so that we can be very efficient. So I now open the floor to members. Whether you're happy with our classification of 4 major areas. So do you have any view at this stage? I'll open the floor to you for comments. If you'd like to speak, please press the request to speak button. So to go through the list. and see if you want to add anything. You can press the request to speak button if you have comments. All right. Now, if you haven't come up with any comments yet, for your information, I very much wanted to meet with you before the recess, and that's why we have this meeting today. And then in the third category, and that is the overall situation of promotion of national and national security education in Hong Kong. Now, in addition to point 3, that is in addition to education and promotion of the Constitution and Basic Law, which is a must, I think we can also learn from overseas practices. Well, if you have studied in the U.S., you know that you have to cover the U.S. Constitution. And even primary and secondary students there are very conversant with the constitutional system of their country. And that's why I asked the administration to research into overseas practice. Whether you are a local citizen or national or just an overseas student in these countries, you have to learn their constitution. All right, open the floor to you to comment. The fourth area is the post-secondary sector. I've received views from members that they're concerned about the implementation in the post-secondary education sector. So we will ask UGC to give us an account of how it monitors universities in the promotion of national and national security education, because at a panel discussion, the UGC and the education and the universities were passing the buck to each other. So I hope we can have some specific guidelines. They should not be shirking their responsibilities, because UGC deferred to the universities and the universities are deferred to UGC, and that is not desirable. I hope we can make some breakthrough in this new term of government. And that will be for Area 4. All right, any views? If not, let's start the agenda proper. Please, Secretary for Education, Ms. Choi, walk us through the paper, please. Now, various bureaus and departments of the Hong Kong SL have all along been working together to share the responsibility of promoting national security. In KG's primary and secondary schools, national education is an important component of fair use education, a key learning goal, and an indispensable part of school curriculum. Now, for primary and secondary schools, Chinese history, development, Chinese culture, Chinese geography, constitution, and basic law education are included, and they form an important part of a school curriculum. In 2019, there was social unrest, and public expectations have become clearer that the Hong Kong as our government should strengthen national education to enhance our next generation's patriotic feelings for and their sense of belonging to our country. With the promulgation and implementation of the Hong Kong National Security Law in mid-2020, the school curriculum was updated by introducing national security education to strengthen the school sector's awareness of law-abidingness and sense of responsibility for safeguarding national security.
National security education is part of and inseparable from national education. The basis of national security education is to cultivate in students a sense of belonging to our country, an affection for the Chinese people, a sense of national identity, and an awareness of and a sense of responsibility for safeguarding national security. It should not be limited to understanding about the law, but should actually cover the legislative background and rationale of the NSL and enable students to understand different aspects of national security. The EDB adopts a multi-pronged and coordinated approach, including providing curriculum guidelines, developing learning and teaching resources, offering training for teachers, and organizing lifelong learning activities for students to fully support schools in planning and promoting in a holistic and systematic manner national education and NSE within and beyond the classroom through whole school participation. To promote national security education in 2021 school year, EDB has announced the school sector, the framework for national education, and also the subjects curriculum. Actually, the teaching emphasis and also elements of teaching have been given to schools so as to help schools promote national security education. In 2021 school year, February, EDB issued detailed guidelines to schools, asking schools to review its existing curriculum and teaching approach and to implement in 2021-22 school year the various curriculum arrangements. Actually, on each teaching day, from January 1st, 2022, all primary and secondary schools display the national flag and conduct a national flag-raising ceremony weekly with the playing and singing of the national anthem. The Values Education Curriculum Framework announced at the end of November last year emphasizes and points out clearly that it is necessary to nurture national awareness of students from an early age, help them develop an accurate understanding of national history, appreciate Chinese culture and traditional values, respect the national symbols and signs, understand the importance of the Chinese to nationals to uphold national security. The framework also updates teaching and learning resources, and it has also set up a self-learning platform covering the Constitution, Basic Law, NSE, National Symbols and Signs, Chinese History and Culture, and museum learning for teachers and students study online. Various subjects are also providing various teaching learning materials to foster students' learning of the history and development of our country. In kindergartens, they should learn the children understand Hong Kong is part of China and understand Hong Kong people's sense of identity, and also to develop among them a sense of belonging to the country. EDB has provided a one-off grant to kindergartens participating in the scheme to buy flags and movable lampposts so that they can stage flag-raising ceremony regularly. The EDB also produce various learning and teaching activities and resources, and to arrange for student ambassadors, workshops, and thematic talks. EDB also came up with a calendar to facilitate schools tracking of various related activities. Schools have reacted overwhelmingly to activities organized by EDB. The number of schools and students participating have been on the increase. Students actively participating in activities could help enhance their sense of belonging to the country. Mainland Exchange is an important component of national education. The EDB continues to organize Mainland Exchange programs of different themes and destinations for students and subsidize those organized by schools, so students can know about the development of science, technology, economy, culture, and so forth on the mainland. effective implementation of national security education really hinges on the support of parents as well, and schools need to strive to facilitate close coordination with key stakeholders and provide mutual support so that each can play their own key role and help schools implement various work in relation to promotion of national security education. And the EDP has long been encouraging schools to adopt a whole school approach. In the days ahead, we would use multi-pronged approach and adopt various measures to support students' understanding of the country's constitution, basic law, and also the history and the latest development of the country. In kindergartens, primary and secondary schools, an effective implementation of national security education, well, with whole school participation, that's indispensable. But media education, family education, and the social atmosphere of loving the nation are also important. We call on various sectors in the community to forge a consensus and to create an atmosphere of loving the country and Hong Kong, and to cultivate among students a stronger sense of identity and also heavier sense of responsibility for the nation. I hope that various sectors can continue to support the EDB in our efforts to actually nurture among students their talents and also broaden the horizon and to prepare to contribute to the nation. Chairman, on kindergarten, primary, secondary schools, efforts to promote national education and national security education, we welcome views from LegCo members, and we also like to support your timetable. At the next subcommittee meeting, we will report to you on the latest on teacher training and professional requirements, and also schools' implementation of the relevant education and the progress made. So that's the end of my briefing so far. Thank you. Thank you, Secretary. Now, I'll open the floor to members. Each member can have 4 minutes. The first one is Reverend Canon Peter Kuhn. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, well, I'd like to thank the Secretary for her briefing, giving much details. But I'd like to ask about a few areas. I heard that the Bureau thinks Mainland Exchange is very important. It's as a backbone of school activity. Well, we do hope that for school students, each will have a time to go to the mainland for exchange activities. But a short trip, like 5 or 7 day trip on the mainland, to the students' sense of national identity, have you assessed how effective that will be? And could you also, besides a flag raising ceremony, would you adopt a soft approach and see how you can assess students' sense of national identity? And also, the Bureau, after so many months, what is your difficulty in promoting the national education in kindergarten, primary, and secondary students? Secretary, please. On exchange trips on the mainland. Well, this is not something new. In primary, secondary schools at different stages of their learning, students have been arranged with all sorts of opportunities for exchange. In line with the Citizenship and Social Development course, all senior secondary students will need to go to the mainland for exchange as well. Just now, Reverend Kuhn asked about the effectiveness of the exchange. Our observation is that students, well, being on the mainland in person and to have actual field trips, that actually very important for their understanding of the development of the country. Because besides knowing about the country through books, they being on site there in person and to carry out field trips, visits to various places that really can enrich the learning. In other aspects of learning, besides, well, visits, before they go on the trip, in the classroom, the teachers would provide learning materials relevant to their trips, and that can help create depth for their visits. So the 21 routes covered by the exchange trips actually are well designed, and upon the return to Hong Kong, the students will need to provide their reflections and observations of their visits on the mainland and to come up with a thematic report, study report. So this can help students not just pick up new knowledge, but also develop their own values. In terms of difficulty in promoting national education, we can see that before the promulgation of national security law, we can see that in terms of national education, there were difficulties, like the national education was smeared and distorted. So now we need to restore all those training, education to what they deserve, and to let the students know their root, cultural, historical root. Reverend Kuhn, any more questions? No? Next one is Dr. Chow Man Kong. Let me tell you that I'll be a bit lax today because we will have enough time for discussion in relation to time allocated to each one of you. And if you think that you want to make some suggestions, feel free to suggest them today so that the administration can follow up on them. So feel free. Besides asking questions, if you have any suggestions or comments on improving the current situation, you're welcome. You have time. I can be lax with the monitoring of time, so you can also cover that if you want. Next one is Dr. Chow Man Kong. Thank you. On national security education and national education, I believe that national members and the central government are very concerned. Besides understanding the nation, more importantly, we need to nurture among students the sense of responsibility to the nation and to Chinese people. EDB is going to has already carried out a number of activities and done your work, which deserves our support, of course. And I've been to various principals' meetings, and even my own teachers. I asked them already about what they think of the implementation so far and what are their suggestions for improvement. EDB for kindergartens, well, it has 4 areas of support, including helping them buy national flags, movable lampposts, and for kindergartens, they also have there's also a video on raising the flag, a video for kindergartens, a reference, and also there's reading materials, designated reading materials for them. The frontline kindergarten principals, teachers, they told me that the resources available now tend to be quite superficial. But how can we help the students actually learn effectively so that they develop the affection for the nation? That isn't done much. So at your next stage of work, EDB, are you going to have new or other measures to enhance your work? For example, provide more teaching guidelines or activities outside the classroom, for example, visits to cultural heritage, because when students go to those heritage sites, they may develop a stronger emotions, affections for the nation. So would you collaborate with other bureaus? And also in terms of multimedia teaching, well, I know that in Quality Education Fund, support can be given to more measures, but it seems like Quality Education Fund now does not encourage kindergartens to produce multimedia materials in relation to STEM in particular. But can you make some adjustments in that regard? We're not talking about teaching very deep stuff to students, but we just want to arouse students' interest. So for kindergartens, the promotion of national education there, your measures for them, can you do some sort of assessment on it? And also, QEF also has my performance pledge upgraded version, and the paper shows that it can allocate 300,000 and 150,000 to schools and kindergartens to carry out activities over 2 years, and schools can choose for funding for national education, national security education, and media literacy education, and IT literacy education. So I asked the frontline teachers, would they apply for funding And if they were to choose one of the 3 topics to get the funding, would they focus on getting funding for media literacy education? But that would mean that a neglect of national and national security education. So how can you let schools know, kindergartens know, that the funding is also available for national and national security education?
We should not be too lopsided and neglect the actual purpose. Secretary, I will give a brief response to the first 2 questions, and on the use of QE fund, I'll defer to Mrs. Hong. I thank Mr. Chow for reflecting to us the situation of frontline teachers of KGs. Yes, we want to enhance the affection training of students so that kids from young will have this sense of national identity. So we are going to make the curriculum lively and integrated in daily activities, including storytelling, etc. Because KG students are rather young, so in participation in the flag raising ceremony and learning the national anthem and also the national emblem, well, we will use experiential learning to enhance students' awareness. Comments and suggestions by Mr. Kwong will be recorded, and then we will enhance the areas mentioned by Mr. Chow. Mrs. Hong, yes, let me briefly introduce to you what's QEF. Now, QEF, value education can cover national education as well. In last year's policy address, that is 2021, there was particular emphasis on media literacy and also national security education. I can share with you some figures to reflect the enthusiastic response from November last year to April this year. We've got over 600 applications from KGs, primary and secondary schools. It takes time to process the 625 applications. Now, students, in particular KG kids, cannot spend too much time on electronic devices. So the KG for KGs, they are not qualified to apply for the allowance for IT. So all the applications are for national security education. So the streamlined processes for the enhanced QEF has a very high success rate, and people will still apply for it. I think because there you can choose one out of the 3 advanced teachers. Some may not want to work on national education security, and they would just focus on media literacy. So maybe you should set a particular ratio so that applications would not be lopsided. And for Mrs. Hong's information, we do understand that we need to protect the eyes of KG students, but it is important to stimulate their interest in learning. For your information, in Finland, Sweden, and even the Ministry of Education, on the use of multimedia, well, it's quite popular and common in their curriculum. So we should catch up with times. Of course, we should not jeopardize their eyesight, but it is important that we nurture these affection for the country. Or if you have any suggestion, Mr. Kwong, do let us have your suggestions. We have to understand that this is really a working group, an action group. So if you have any suggestions, you can pass them on to the administration for follow-up. By the next meeting, you will know that we are going to compile a report with recommendations for implementation. Mr. Stanley Ng. Thank you, Chair. From the paper, I can see that the administration has been working very hard in implementing national education with some progress as well. But then, we can also appreciate that the national awareness in Hong Kong and also understanding of the country's system are rather inadequate. So, we should focus on education of to learn more about Constitution. So what are we doing to teach our primary and secondary school students the Constitution? What is an effective way? Now, our Constitution says right from the beginning that our country is a socialist country under the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. And presidency said that the leadership is the Communist Party. And Chinese nationals, if they're hostile, must struggle with hostile external forces that want to sabotage our system. The first article said that the PRC is a socialist state governed by a people's democratic dictatorship that is led by the working class and based on an alliance of workers and peasants. And the socialist system is the fundamental system of the PRC. Leadership by the Communist Party of China is the defining feature of socialism with Chinese characteristics, and it is prohibited for any organization or individual to damage the socialist system. We must strengthen education on these fundamentals, and I hope everyone in Hong Kong can learn the content of our Constitution in a lively and effective manner. And the Bureau should work hard on developing resources, learning resources for national education. We have monuments and historic structures in Hong Kong. They are rich resources, and we should develop them and allow our students to learn from these structures. And then we have got a few memorial days, and it seems that our education sector rarely makes use of them. And of course, in the second month of November, we have a day to memorize the country's past troubles, and on the 3rd of September, commemoration of our struggle against Japanese invasion, and also public mourning day for the Nanking massacre, etc. I'd like to know the extent of participation on the part of students. Can the Secretary please enlighten us on that? Thank you very much, Mr. Ng. On how we can strengthen Constitution education for primary and secondary students in particular. I hope that by learning the Constitution, the Basic Law, and also the national security law, they can develop a sense of national identity. Now, we will integrate the information into the overall curriculum depending on the stage of development of students. Now, for primary schools, they have this area of learning about the South and the country, and we will incorporate this into the curriculum. And then there is a separate module starting from junior secondary. We have 15 hours of general studies for national identity and Chinese culture. And of course, we should learn about the basic system of the country, and also it's important that we learn about our country from a historical perspective, and how the one country, two systems have developed, and it's important that our students understand all these from a historical perspective. And so Chinese history is compulsory and a dependent subject in junior secondary section, so that students can have a better understanding of contemporary history of the country. And then in general studies for S4, we have got Hong Kong under one country, two systems, and our country since reform and opening up. And another one, there are 3 themes, and this is to enable them to develop a comprehensive and accurate understanding of the country's development. On development of teaching resources, for instance, since the opening of the National Palace Museum, we have been using that resource, and also the history of important figures in Chinese history. Perhaps Mrs. Hong can go into details. On commemorative days, yes, we are working very hard. Again, I will defer to Mrs. Hong. She can give a very detailed response. Yes. We will use classroom learning to instill knowledge. I agree that we should adopt a multi-pronged approach. So when we have the important historic events, now, for instance, this is the 80th anniversary of the Dongjiang guerrilla. And so we'll first train our Chinese history teachers. We will take them to site visits of important historic sites, and then we will develop teaching materials. So teachers should learn about these things first. And for important historic events, we should allow students to get a feel, and it's important for teachers to feel these events first. So we've got a planning calendar now for the 3rd of September and Nanjing Massacre, and also the 18th of September. Well, these important dates are included in the teaching calendar. And then for 18th of September and the Nanjing Massacre, we have got activities. We asked some veteran soldiers to share their experience with teachers. So teachers need to be equipped with the knowledge first, and then the students can be led to develop an affection for our country. Now, we understand that it is a long process, and with more participation from the teaching sector, we are going to enhance our work in this area. Dr. Chen would like to supplement. Please be brief. Yes. Mr. Ng talked about education of the Constitution. In fact, in the senior secondary curriculum, we have very clear themes in the citizen and social development subject, and we've already published information or teaching materials on the first two themes: Hong Kong under one country, two system, and our country since reform and opening up. We have these papers for teachers' reference. I believe Mr. Tang Fei has already seen such information for teaching CS. We do expect teacher to have a correct grasp of the subject.
December 4th, that's the National Constitution Day, and we organize activities on that day every year. Okay, suggestion here. Just now, Deputy Secretary mentioned that, well, more teachers have been trained. Can you give us some figures in relation to that to help us assess the change made? So can you give us a supplementary paper? And also Dr. Chen mentioned the PowerPoint. Well, since members asked about it and we are concerned, so I propose that next time at our meeting, you can prepare for us and give us in advance information that you're going to share at the meeting. Because this subcommittee, we do look at details. On your PowerPoints, we may have comments to make. So you might give those information to us beforehand next time. And rules of procedure for today's subcommittee. I hope that we can have an in-depth discussion today. So I would not, like in other scenarios, stop members from talking. I do want to give you space to have more follow-up on your points made. But for those who join later, when we are running out of time, we need to be more careful with keeping the time. But I do hope that in your first round, at least, you know well what the government is doing. And I'll try not to stop you from talking, so you can have ample time to ask your questions. Next one, Tang Fei. 3 questions from me. National education involves a lot of element related to affection. And it also has to do with the student's sense of identity. But the biggest difficulty is how you assess a person's affection. Say, early April last year, there were news reports that frontline teachers in secondary and primary schools, well, they know that there's a kit on effective education given to schools, and the questions in the assessment kit cause controversy. For example, they ask students whether they should also support the nation. So it's nothing to do with, not so much about the kit on assessing national education, but how we can effectively measure the effectiveness of national education in primary schools and secondary schools. If we don't have a comprehensive assessment, then we might end up have to rely on opinion poll organizations to carry out, people's sense of national identity on a yearly basis. Well, how much do people here identify themselves as Hong Kong people? And that would dominate our impression of national sense of identity in Hong Kong. But indeed, it should be the ETP which takes the initiative. And now you have very rich materials for the teaching of national education. But I want to know, would you have some sort of progressive design, like flag raising ceremony and playing of national anthem? They learn about it, they do it in kindergarten, primary, secondary. If the same ceremony is repeated year after year, of course, that can reinforce students' identity. But if you're just repeating the activity, then that may not be ideal. Are there any things you can do? For example, as students getting older, then their content of knowledge can also increase. And thirdly, we have lots of fantastic teaching materials, learning kit, like the teaching kit on history of wars in China, and we have collaborated with Mainland Institute on the design of national security materials, learning materials, very updated. But what measures does the Bureau have to ensure that schools can effectively and frequently use those learning materials, not just put them online alone or put them aside, not utilizing them, because that would be a big waste. When we promoted the basic law before, we published a lot of materials for schools to use, but the usage rate by schools isn't that ideal. So what can you do to ensure that such fantastic learning materials can be used frequently by schools?
我簡單回應一下阿鄧。
Secretary, I'll respond simply to Mr. Tang's question and give you supplements later on. In terms of effective education, and how do we assess the effectiveness of national education? Well, we're going to have a meeting at which we'll give you ample details. But just to give you the highlights now, in national education, there are various aspects to it. One is the knowledge of level of knowledge, and the other is the level of affection, and then the next level is acts to exercise his patriotism. So Mr. Tang just now mentioned that, well, we have an assessment tool that targets, well, students' ethics and affections. It covers a lot of areas. And for the national identity, well, that's only one part of the areas assessed. In schools, it's mainly through teachers' observations, and as I mentioned, well, through acts like participating in flag raising ceremony or study tours, exchange tours, and students show of their intention to see the country improve, and that would be actually in line with our learning goal. And students willing to study hard or participate much in activities to help improve the development or foster the development of the country. And to us, that is also a clear act showing off their patriotism and affection for the nation. And in terms of progressive ladder of learning, at kindergarten level, the curriculum is intended that students should be able to recognize the national flag, that students know that they are Chinese. And in primary and secondary schools, as students' cognitive ability progresses, then students are supposed to know the meaning of the anthem and the flag raising ceremony, the history, culture of the country. So that will grow as the students become more cognitively mature. So learning will become more and more enriching, and students can relate more to their nation. And thirdly, on teaching materials, how schools can use them more, we are proactively trying to promote the use of those materials. We don't just distribute them. A lot of teachers' professional training activities would also feature our learning materials. So teachers need to know how to use them, and they are aware of the existence of the materials, and that actually would help drive the usage of those materials. And also the learning kits are tied in with the curriculum, so they should provide actual help to teachers, very practical. Any supplements from other colleagues? Chairman, let me supplement on national security education and how to promote it. With the promulgation of national security law in 2021, we issued a detailed education guidelines to schools, asking schools to evaluate the situation, lay down plans, and also report to the management committees of the schools on the progress made in that regard. And in setting their plans, they also need to make reference to their review results in terms of administration, student counseling, parent teacher school cooperation, and teaching and learning. They need to incorporate those assessment results into planning, and also to carry out planning for the schools. And our colleagues will also go to the schools to try to see what are the results of the review and to see where there need to be stricter adherence to the curriculum guidelines. Our frontline staff would keep liaisons with the schools and provide advice when necessary. Thank you. Next one is Mr. Chen Yong. Thank you, Chairman and Secretary. John Lee, the CE, says that we should be results oriented, and the government has done a lot of work in the past 20 years or so. In national education, we have seen some deviations. You will agree that if we had done more earlier on, then the black-led violence or the misguidance and the hatreds we saw earlier would not be so rampant. As for teaching materials, President Xi, on his visit on July 1st, made an important speech, and he mentioned the importance of strengthening students' education, and that should also emphasize China's 5,000 years of history. And Mr. Li also mentioned the need to enhance students' sense of belonging to the nation. We all agree we need to step up national education in kindergarten, primary, and secondary schools, but the key is what should be the required elements of the curriculum. Well, I know that in some schools, the Bureau allows them to choose from various topics, and yet in the end, no one is held responsible. No one knows what are their exact responsibilities, what they should do. Or raising the national flag, is that a must? Should that be a must? And many school board members and principals have told us that they would rather be given clearer guidelines so that there would not be any need for debates or uncertainty. And secondly, as mentioned by some members, locally there are lots of materials on national education, particularly the history of fighting the Japanese during the war. And I had followed this up for 10 years in NPC. That is, the kindergartens in Hong Kong should cover the history of Hong Kong's fight against the Japanese during the Second World War. During the Japanese occupation, lots of things that happened. And if you tell students what happened then in Hong Kong, then students will have a stronger memory and impression of what really went on. Mr. Li said that you can come up with plans in 100 days. So people are most concerned about KPI, timetable, and roadmap. So once you've got the goal for national education, what in the coming 100 days would you need to achieve in a time frame of 100 days? You can select 10 items and make sure that 6 of the 10 items must be done by schools, for example, and results seen in the 100 days, so that people will have a clearer idea of what has been done. So if we all do it all well together, then we'll see results more. So now, the secretary can, I know you're busy maybe now, but I'm sure, Secretary, you can try to identify. We can continue trying to reach consensus on what we want to see achieved in 100 days. I'm sure after the 100 days, we'll see more clearly the results, and we'll have more confidence in enhancing national education. Secretary, on your first question, what must be required from the schools and what can be optional for the schools? In national education, national security education, the most important is we need to give schools very clear guidelines for universities, primary, secondary schools. We do have clear guidelines now on how and what they should teach. For example, teaching students to abide by the law, respect the rule of law and to pay attention to the sense of identity. And guidelines also cover the role of school management committees, the leadership in schools, supervisors, and even teachers. Clear guidelines, clear roles are given.
即係冇
And on the curriculum level, we're also very clear. We have provided the framework and also the learning elements and also guidelines for different learning stages for schools' information and implementation. And then at students' activities level, we have got mandatory activities. For instance, tours and exchange activities. And we've also got optional mainland tours based on the situation of the school. It is free to make arrangements. We encourage every student to go on one mainland tour at least during their school life. And then we've got different trainings, and students can choose based on their interest and ability. That is very clear to schools. And the second question is how we can utilize local teaching materials. Mrs. Hong has introduced some of them to you. We will monitor the latest developments, and if we have new resources, we will make good use of them. As regards how we can see results in the first 100 days of the new government. Now for national and national security education, there are several aspects. The cognitive aspect is easy to measure, but for identity, sense of identity and values, now we should not be too rush, because with more participation and understanding, the affection will follow. So it takes time. National education and patriotic education is a long process, and we need sustained efforts, and we should not go for quick results. We should have sustained efforts to do this. Follow up? Yes, we need medium and long-term results, but we should also have immediate results. If we do not achieve something within the first 100 days of the new government, we would be under tremendous pressure from our electors. I get your point, and that's why I said that various sectors in the community are very concerned about the work of this subcommittee. Now, today we are talking about implementation in KG's primary and secondary schools. I'm of the view that teaching materials, teachers, parents, and methodology and appropriateness are all important, and we should not just go through the motions. I hope the Secretary understands this. When it comes to teaching materials, we've got those student or children picture books developed by the Speech Therapists Association. So you need double efforts to correct a wrong. I've been in this council for 14 years, and as soon as I joined the education panel, I already realized the problems associated with the liberal studies subject. But if we have teaching materials for KG students, that is really unacceptable. Now, last year, when footage on the Nanjing massacre was shown in class, because without a proper screening by the Education Bureau, some scenes not suitable for tender eyes were shown. So you have to follow up. Now for materials distributed to KGs, now we focus on audiovisual. You have to follow up. You should not just act when there is a complaint from parents. You may mean well, but then the results can be counterproductive. So you have to pay particular attention to this. The secretary mentioned a number of times mainland exchange tours. In fact, many students have come back from these visits that they do not believe in what they saw, and everything was staged. Now, that was the response of some students. And whether we're talking about local or international schools, if you just ask tour guides to arrange a 2-day tour, then it is really rather it's a pity, because you should not just simply leave it to a tour guide. I have organized such mainland exchange tours myself. Well, they will have a knowledgeable tour guide to explain the materials and to us. And then an international school headmaster really did very well in this regard. So when schools arrange exchange tours, you have to note what is involved in the tour, and you must ensure that you have quality tour guides. You should spend more resources so that you have qualified persons to lead these tours. And the sites you choose to visit are also important. Some students have been on these tours for a few times, but they have got nothing from them. So you must follow through. I'd like to know whether you have dedicated persons to monitor the the organization of exchange tours. And then your teaching materials must be bilingual. Now, from a parent's perspective, when I learned about the U.S., they have got a video called The Men Who Built America, showcasing the history right from the Industrial Revolution to contemporary history. So we should have a similar quality teaching resources, not just in Chinese but in English, so that we can tell the China story well even to international school students. There are local and also expatriate students in international schools, and I have seen teaching materials with excellent videos. So if you need resources, we are more than happy to accept, because if you can have 1 or 2 well-produced videos, I'm sure that will go a long way. On teaching resources, yes, I agree that the quality and accuracy of teaching materials are of utmost importance. So in terms of development and compilation of teaching materials, we have very clear guidelines, and we also have a vetting mechanism to ensure that the teaching materials are of good quality and fulfill the requirements. Now, previously, we did not have a textbook vetting mechanism for liberal studies. Things went wrong, and now things are already corrected. And teachers should not just use teaching materials and show them to students. They should have a proper teaching plan, their teaching objectives, the challenges, and also the difficulties faced by students, whether the teaching materials are too difficult or too easy for students. So this is about the professionalism of teachers concerned. Teaching materials are there. It's just an tool how the teaching materials can be used in a lively manner and effective manner. That is the role of teachers. To ensure that students get something out of the teaching materials is the duty of teachers. As for mainland exchange tours, yes, we already noted some of the problems you mentioned. So we are very targeted in dealing with issues of concern related to exchange tours. I will defer to my colleagues because they have put in a lot of resources to ensure that our mainland exchange tours can help students to learn more about the country. And we will introduce more stories in our teaching materials. We would like to use some TV dramas that of excellent production. We can use some of them. And if we have community resources available in the community on our country's history and also such as a record of 100 years of struggle, well, they will be used. Before you comment or you respond on the part about mainland tours. Now, Secretary, you keep emphasizing that teachers' professionalism is important, but would like to know how the Education Bureau will ensure and I mean your duty and responsibility. And we are not targeting at the majority of good teachers. We don't want 10 or 20% of the black sheep in the teaching force to cause problems among students. You like to stress the professionalism of teachers, but we have seen some problems. Well, how do we support teachers? We do not just give them teaching materials. We have workshops and seminars, and we visit schools to develop these materials on site with teachers. Of course, we cannot cover all schools. Students have to raise a flag if they need us to visit them, to observe classes, and to appraise their classroom teaching. So we do visit schools to give them support. Once again, you should adopt a preventive approach. You should not just tackle a problem after it has appeared. You should have for instance, a video already well edited, etc., because schools may not have time to redo or to edit the videos. Now, in fact, the video you referred to was not distributed by the Education Bureau. Rather, it was a production by the RTHK. So when teachers use such materials available in the community, we do remind them to see whether students can digest them. Well, for mainland visits, it's not for sightseeing. So the duration can be 2 days or even up to 6 to 7 days. There must be clear objectives. There are key learning points, and also make known to parents. We've got pamphlets here. Now we have 50,000 students, and we are now communicating with the mainland authorities. We are not a travel agency. We'd like to know whether those points have learning points, and whether there is value in visiting them. So we will only go on a tour after we have a good plan and made proper planning. So it is not really a sightseeing tour. No, we have got pamphlets and we have key learning areas for mainland exchange visits, not just for CS.
Yes, Dr. Chen, besides the pamphlets, well, they also cover questions in relation to various topics. And before they leave for China, we arrange a briefing for teachers to tell the teachers what sorts of effects we want to see coming from the tours. And there will also be, upon the students' return, a gathering for the students to share their experiences. For example, those who went on a musical tour, they would tell us about their visits to key sites. So many of our exchange tours, because they are held together with mainland institutions, so students can go to places that travel agents cannot have access to. Thank you. So give us just supplementary information, how you organize the tours. Please provide some background information to us for our follow-up. Next one is Chu Kwok Kang. Thank you, Chairman. Well, we want to promote national education and national security education. I think what we need to do first is to clarify our goals. Well, national security education should be made as part of national education. National education is a term with a low-level criterion. Well, it was made before, and even National Education Center was suspended as a result of people's opposition. What is the purpose of national education? It is to, through an awareness of someone's national identity, fosters patriotism. So once we know about the risks facing a nation, then people would see the importance of having better awareness of national security and stronger patriotism. Each country on earth is actually teaching education as a matter of fact. In the past decade, the EDB, in its notices, they always use the term national identity, and it's only in the past 2 years when the term patriotism appears. National security law has been implemented, and now we have patriots governing Hong Kong. Maybe the administration still thinks that it's not the right time yet to change the wording in your notices. Maybe in your wordings, in your notices to schools, you can actually use the wordings of national education more instead. When do you think is a good time to change it? And you tend to use national sense of identity more in your other correspondences, but would you replace that expression with national education instead? The national security education, the amount of resources for it is not adequate, because for each level or class, Form 1, once materials are used there by students reach Form 2, they would not be given the same materials, right? So if you don't have adequate materials, then teachers will need to spend a lot of time preparing them, and schools may not have the resources needed. And your values education team, it does have good quality materials produced, even though the amount is not enough, but they do produce good quality materials. So can you, or would you know, how often are the materials used. 2 weeks ago, I asked about some education workers. There were 50 principals, teachers present on that occasion. I asked them whether they know about the resources produced by Values Education team. Only one raised his hand. What does it show? How can we make sure that schools look at and use our materials? The problem lies with the fact that it's all school-based. So some would know or some don't. Can you require schools, principals or some supervisors to make it compulsory for them to attend some workshops and to go for mandatory training and arrange for substitute teachers when they are undergoing training so that your resources would be used and exposed to students? National security education cannot just rely on notices and materials issued by EDB. So would the Bureau consider in a systematic manner use the approach of seed schools so that your materials can be optimized? For example, on a particular theme like national security education, can you set 20 topics under it and distribute it to 20 schools for development? You provide guidance and resources for the schools so they can devise some curriculum framework and teaching materials, and the results can then be shared with all other schools in Hong Kong. And the materials produced by these schools can also be incorporated into the resource web on the EDP website. Sometimes materials produced by schools may be more relevant and effective. Would you consider that, Secretary? On national education, our goal is very clear. Just now, Mr. Chu asked about it. We have increased topics on constitution, geography, history, national security, and so forth of the country as part of the material so that students can develop a stronger sense of national identity and a patriotic attitude. As time goes, well, your views are noted, but so far our goal remains, and we are trying to foster national education through what we do. And as for the whether we can increase the quantity of learning materials, thank you, Mr. Chu, for your compliment for our materials, and our colleagues are actively devising or developing new materials and also online self-learning platforms for schools, students as well, so that they can pick the materials depending on their interest as they like. The self-learning materials, that is. And your third point about values education or the usage rate of teaching materials, how we can enhance the usage rate. I think we need to step up our publicity. In the past, we have focused on promoting them online, and sometimes teachers may not all of them may not be exposed to our materials. So we explore more channels to let more teachers know that we have developed materials for them. And also, how are we going to further optimize national education materials? Mr. Chu, you made a good point, and it's practical as well. In the past, in promoting new curriculum initiatives, we would involve seed schools and to let schools which have the experience and have performed well to lead less experienced or less resourced schools so that we can consolidate professional input and to have schools and teachers develop together relevant, good materials for students. So whether they're developed by our own colleagues or by schools themselves, I think if they are good learning materials, they should be worthy of our promotion. So we can, we're looking into how we can provide wider support for schools to promote national education. So any supplements from our colleagues? No? Okay. Next is Edward Leung. Thank you, Chairman, Secretary. Mainland tours is a requirement for citizenship and social development subject to enhance students' sense of identity, national identity. But there are some issues with it. because these tours are only evaluated on pass or fail basis. But on the DSE report card, it won't show whether they failed it or not. And thirdly, even if someone fails the exchange tour requirement, it has no impact on the DSE results. So that means it will not affect students' scores, overall scores. So this is an exchange tour which does not really require any or expect any particular results. So for teachers, well, on this tour, teacher-student ratio is 1 to 10. So do we have enough teachers to support the tours? If all students are going on such tours, would the EDB give more support if schools cannot spare the teachers? And also, now we have a policy to encourage students to go on the tours in the mainland, and yet it won't affect their DSE results, even if students don't choose not to go. So this is an issue. How are you going to rectify this loophole? Secretary? Thank you, Mr. Liang. On citizenship and social development subject, the mainland tours, indeed, in relation to it, well, we don't really want students to go on a tour for the sake of getting good scores. We really want students to learn through the tours and have in-depth learning. So therefore, we tried that we do not give any score for this tour because we think that we want to actually make the tours more useful to students. Well, they have not been undertaken because of the pandemic, but we also want to ease students' exam pressure, but let them have a broader view, understanding of the development of the country. In liberal studies, before you know, students may not really think through issues carefully. They just wanted to go for elements that help them get high score. But for this new subject of CS, we don't want students to learn for the sake of getting a high score. So that's the intention of this, the design of this subject. And as for the teacher-student ratio of 1 to 10, well, you're concerned about our teachers and the quality of docents. Well, we know that our colleagues, if needed, they can provide some support for schools, but Mrs. Hong could supplement. Mrs. Hong? Thank you, Chairman. 1 to 10 is not a new requirement. All along for mainland exchange tours, the ratio has been 1 to 10. And some schools have students from the whole level go to the tour together, happily. So we are carrying out a study on how many students from a tour go and how often and so forth, because that has implications for their distribution of resources. On the whole, as reflected by principals, if they let students from different levels go, then there will not be much difficulties. And if they face difficulties, we are actually training up some retired principals and vice principals. There are not that many of them, but if needed, we could actually see how we can mobilize them. But still, schools want to deal with the issues themselves. If you ask a student to go on a tour with someone they don't know, even if it's a famous former principal, it won't help. Let me clarify that for CS subject, even though the exchange tour has no scores given and it's not on DSE report card, it's not an opt-out subject because it's a valuable learning experience paid for by the government. Unless there are very special reasons, like someone falls sick, basically students cannot opt out of the tour, and students need to consider if the students cannot make it, how it need to think of other ways to help the students learn. So it's like other indoor sports contests and so forth, and like that, students cannot just say they're sick and forfeit the chance to go on a tour. So it won't have any effect on the DSE results. Well, this is an educational process. Students must exhaust all means to educate their students. If the students don't go, then they would, of course, lose out, but they still need to complete a relevant related project, which we will put on the student's profile. So we need to let the schools think of alternatives, or the schools would. And students may also need to do some sharings with the schools. So students need to know that, if they have a chance to go happily with fellow students on a tour, then they should like to go. And if they don't want to go, they have to actually do something similar. So peer group can help create the atmosphere for them to learn.
I think we can leave it to schools to follow up. I'm sure these cases are just in the minority. I think we can leave it to schools to follow up. And I think it's feasible for schools to follow up and then inform you afterwards. Mr. Benson Look, thank you. As mentioned by colleagues, national and national security education is not just about imparting knowledge, but effective education as well. In the past 2 years, because of the pandemic, students were mainly learning at home, and student participation involvement has increased. I have heard cases that parents are giving their students, their children, opposite values compared to what the schools are teaching. And in para 18, I am pleased to see cooperation between parents and schools. And you say that schools can apply for homeschool cooperating grants for organizing parent education activities. Can the Bureau tell us the use of such grants? And learning the spirit of national leaders' speeches are also important. After President Xi delivered his important speech on the 1st of July, different civil servants and officials and legislators are learning the spirit of his speech. And I've been to different sessions, and every time I attended a session, I got new insight. So I think it should be a compulsory activity. It's not optional. And in learning the important speeches of our country leaders, should be an important part of a new chapter in Hong Kong. Now, I'd like to know whether teachers, parents, and children are learning the important speech of President Xi. Do you have any statistics? And can you please tell us the state of implementation? And also on para 18, it is said that the administration will continue to provide resources to provide support to assist schools in promoting parent education. What is the direction and plans for the new academic year and the years to follow to achieve some attainable or tangible targets? Secretary, thank you, Mr. Lok, for your questions. I cannot agree more that parents' support are most important. So, in various aspects, now we have the Homeschool Cooperation Committee, and there are also parent-teacher associations in all 18 districts. Now, parent support is not just about national education. It is indispensable in the all-round development of students in terms of care of there's children in the academic and educational pursuit. Now we have started parents' education from KG level. We understand that the younger the kids are, the more important parents' influence. So we are organizing various parent education activities. We have not singled out activities mainly for national education, but we'll go back and check afterwards. Now, for the spirit of Presidency's speech, I have said on various occasions that it has everything to do with our students, because Presidency did not just gave a conclusion of 25 years of implementation of one country, two systems. It's also important for the future development of Hong Kong. So all young people and all children must grasp these important concepts so that they will understand that for their goals and dreams in life, they must be closely related to the future of the country. So different organizations should learn the president's speech from different perspectives, and we are going to organize an event for school sponsoring bodies, teachers, and also everyone in the teaching sector to understand the significance of President's speech on the education sector and the development and education of our young people, and there should be opportunities for exchange. And with regard to the 4 hopes of Presidency and his care for young people, I think they should form important direction of future administration and education. Have I left out anything? The third question, the last part of para 18. I'd like to know whether the Bureau has got plans for allocation of resources to assist schools in promoting parent education. So do you have any plans? You might have noted that the CE in his election manifesto mentioned the importance of school-home cooperation. So we will enhance the diversity of these activities and provide resources. Thank you. Mr. Dennis Leung. Thank you. The topic is the promotion of national and national security education. There are 2 important areas. Now, to be result-oriented, we should ensure that every compatriot in Hong Kong has a sense of identity with the Chinese nation. And in terms of national security, we should let everyone in Hong Kong develop a sense to defend and protect our country. Now, I have said a number of times that we are not very correct in the use of some terms instead of Hong Kong and mainland, we should issues. We should say cross-border issues, and we should say cross-boundary lorry drivers, etc. We attach too much significance to Hong Kong. The emphasis should be on the country. For instance, we used to say Hong Kong government. We should say Hong Kong SL government instead. This is something for the whole government to address. We should not keep asking questions whether you identify with being a Chinese national. When I was a kid, I was required to fill out in the student handbook my hometown, but now this is no longer required. Will you strengthen this concept. They should know their root, their hometown, so that they can have a stronger sense of national identity. Secondly, we want to be result-oriented. I think the most important thing is teacher training. I think teachers' awareness and understanding is weak in this regard. Well, since the Black Cloud violence in 2019, there have been major improvements or enhancements in the relevant curriculum in 2021. I'd like to know before 2020 how much the Hong Kong SL government has done to educate our teachers what is the country's socialist system and what is the Chinese Communist Party, and how much have we covered? Will there be more resources to understand the concept of socialism with Chinese characteristics under presidency's leadership? And we should learn more about Marxism and Leninism. I was fortunate enough to have joined the FDU, which is a patriotic organization that loves Hong Kong. I've learned contemporary and Chinese and ancient history. Now, the secretary said that it was difficult to have quantifiable data on affection. In fact, you have got this APASO system. Will you devise another questionnaire survey covering students from P1 to S6, so you understand the students' sense of national identity at different stages? You will then be able to use such data to formulate new objectives and to adjust your approach before you can be result-oriented. So I hope the Bureau can consider how this can be done. Thank you. Mr. Leung's first question is about terminology and how we can have a uniform set of terminology within the Hong Kong SL government. In fact, our material development division will work on this. It will work with the CMAB and come up with a uniformed set of terminology, and will provide an updated version in our teaching materials. And Mr. Leung asked about the origins and also hometowns of our students. Well, there may be different views on this, but in language learning, now we have more classics and classical texts included, and also the delicacies of different provinces and county and hometown, and also the names of students' grandfather and great-grandfather. These are activities to assist the students to learn more about their root. And this is part about identity of self and personal development. We use various ways and means to help students to associate their life with their root. And as for teachers' data, we'll see whether we have historical data. For teacher training, we understand that society is developing rapidly, and there are various areas under the framework for professional development of teachers and principals. I think we should ensure balanced and all-rounded development of teachers, and teachers training of teachers in their virtues and integrity should also be included. And as for the questionnaire on affection, yes, I agree that we should have data to serve as a feedback of our teaching. Mrs. Hong can supplement. And also Ms. Chen. Thank you. Starting from 2020-21, all newly recruited teachers and newly promoted teachers will, in their core training, have this additional element of constitution and national and basic law. And for training of new school managers, our training would also include the constitution and basic law.
By the end of last year, we have organized 30 learning sessions, and we've also maintained continuous ties with professional organizations to hold 3-day-long enhancement training. 600 teachers and principals have participated in those training sessions, and also to commemorate the centenary of the founding of the Chinese Communist Party. Last year, we organized 4 talks on the topic, and also with the all together with the central government's office in Hong Kong, we also organized talks, special thematic talks for principals. In the next academic year, we would step up efforts for the organizing of mainland tours, which are also part of the core training of new teachers. They have been postponed because of the pandemic. The 3 to 4 mainland study tours will be held together with mainland counterpart organizations. The framework has been devised, and they will cover visits to various sites. And if the situation allows, we would kickstart those tours immediately. Next one is Lillian Kwok. Thank you. All along, as I was listening to the conversations, I was very pleased to know that the Education Bureau is actually actively promoting national education. I agree with Chu Kwok Kang that we should call it a patriotism education, because that's the purpose. We hope all our students to be patriotic as a result of the education. In 2002, electoral papers indicate that in 2000 and 2001, Education Bureau have been promoting a national education and history, enhancing students' knowledge of the history against the Japanese. But 20 years have passed, and it seems like the results of the education have been a failure. So I want to see what responses the administration has. Firstly, on in your review of the curriculum for primary and secondary school, would you strengthen the element on our anti-Japanese efforts during the war, instead of just having piecemeal information? That is, under the framework of the curriculum, can you strengthen the element on the anti-Japanese war? And in paragraph 21 of the paper, it says that you are going to enhance sister schools. But what about the effectiveness of that? So how are you going to enhance your ties with sister schools? Would you have teachers put on exchange tours or teacher exchange programs? Can that be made part of your enhancement of your scheme involving sister schools, so that there can be more actually exchange between Hong Kong and China in the education sector? And also talk about social participation. You would say that you want to call on the community to participate in your efforts, but can you try to take a more proactive role and try to collaborate with the Home Affairs and Youth Bureau so that the work on educating youth can be enhanced? And also the fourth point is the role of EDB. It's very important. But there are, in the past years, I've heard that many of the initiatives are school-based and schools have the autonomy. I totally agree with that. But the ETP should play a leading role to give schools a definitive framework that schools should follow, comply with the framework. You also said that you provide support to schools to help the teachers to build up their plans. But I want to know, in the past, how many schools have you been to or provided on-site support to? What is the result of your support? Can you follow the mode of seed schools or support schools and help those schools help others? What is your strategy ahead? Thank you. Secretary, on your first question, that is in the secondary primary school curriculum, how we can enhance the element on the anti-Japanese war. Well, actually, it's included already in our curriculum, but my colleague can give you more details later on in relation to the curriculum. So Gloria could elaborate on that. And on our sister schools, how are you going to enhance it? Sister schools, well, they do vary. Besides the schools initiative, how the sister schools collaborate with the partner school, that's also important. But the pairs, the relationship of pairs could vary. Some schools may actually arrange for teacher, student, or even parent participation. Have mutual visits between the pairs. Some principals actually go to their mainland sister schools together with their teachers and students, and even visit mainland families. So such mutual visits do exist in some pairs of sister schools. And so they can have mutual experience or appreciation of the cultures on both sides. And teachers can also have more exchanges with their mainland counterparts on teaching particular subjects. And principals can also share with their mainland counterparts on school management. And so this could help foster professionalism in both places. So in the future, we do hope to have more diversified activities for these school pairs. So maybe there can be deeper exchanges between teachers from both sides. And so there can be better cultural experiences for teachers as well. In paragraph 23, about how we can enhance or take a more active role in involving the participation of all sectors. But I think that's the consensus of the current team of government in Hong Kong. We do want to see more participation from all sectors. We're all working as a team to try to promote national education more, and so that all sectors of society will support our initiative. And fourthly, the Education Bureau in promoting national education. What is our role? How we can play a stronger role? Ms. Kwok and Mr. Chu mentioned that in the past, we provide on-site support to schools and also have seed school schemes. In the future, if we see the need, then we will continue with this effective measure to find some schools with good developments to lead other schools in developing their own school-based initiatives. Mrs. Hong could supplement on that, but now I would like to ask Gloria to tell you more about the curriculum first. Dr. Chen? Thank you, Chairman, and the Secretary. Okay, in response to Ms. Kwok's concern, the anti-Japanese war is a clear part of the element of the curriculum for general studies in the primary school. There's one particular section on the 8 year of struggle against the Japanese to help students review our history, including the Opium War, on top of the years of effort against the Japanese in Hong Kong. And at the junior secondary level, for Chinese history subject, there's an element on Chinese history, and by students reached Form 3, there is an element on Japanese invasion and anti-Japanese war, which covers Japanese invasion, the background of Japanese invasion in China, the process of the Sino-Japanese War, and also the outcome. So all these elements, they are vetted by and also the textbooks are vetted by the Education Bureau. And materials are also vetted by the Education Bureau. For Mainland Exchanges, there is actually one trip that takes teachers and students to Nanjing. Unless it clashes with the National Mourning Day, we would definitely, when they're in Nanjing, to take students to the museum on the Japanese invasion, so that students can really feel strongly, have a personal feel of that part of history. On September 18 and October 13, every year, well, in our CM, it states it very clearly, even though for primary school teachers, they would need to, in our CM, we made it very clear that if they don't want to see the videos in relation to those particular occasions, they can use textbooks and other learning teaching materials to teach students about the, unforgettable part of Chinese history, the events related to it. But I wanted to make Hong Kong's effort against Hong Kong's anti-Japanese war to be put in the curriculum. Yes, in primary school it's covered, and in secondary school for Chinese history subject, there is this element on how Chinese nationals fought against Japanese and won in the end. And in the history subject, there's also coverage on the 3 years and 8 months of Japanese occupation in Hong Kong. Let me supplement here on support for schools. Education Bureau, in terms of its curriculum design, we want to, make sure still that schools can implement national education and national security education. We will, well, because of the curriculum framework and the 15 subjects covered, so how we can, within and outside of classes, we can achieve the goal of the education in order to help schools clarify the related concepts. For all schools in Hong Kong, they actually have participated our push-in workshops in schools where all teachers in the school are required to attend, because at the workshop we would brief the teachers and principals on the overall coverage, what various subjects need to cover, and so they need to see areas they should deliver, and not just within the classroom, but also let students have a in-person experience of classroom, outside classroom. All schools have to participate. We hope that by next year we can cover all schools. Indeed, by now we have covered 800 schools. More than 40,000 teachers have joined our compulsory workshop. Thank you. Next one is Lee Chung-kang. Thank you, Chairman. You all know that President Xi Jinping on July 1st, despite the risk of pandemic and the typhoon, he arrived in Hong Kong and he made the talk in West Kowloon, saying that the heart of the Chinese government is also with Hong Kong people. On July 1st, he made an important point that there's one principle, that is to strengthen one country, two systems. And that shows that the principle of one country is very important. And the Education Bureau also should have this mission of, when it comes to national education or patriotism education, it should not be limited to secondary primary schools, but it should be actually carried out across Hong Kong among everyone here. In terms of integrating Hong Kong into national development, it should not be treated as a slogan alone or something in the textbook. We need to be grateful for the opportunities given to us by the country. Like when they have Olympic athletes which won gold in the Tokyo Olympics. How can we actually share the joy, and also how we can say or tell a good Hong Kong story outside, so that we can help actually meet the goal of what we should do.
But our worry is now we have our KG and primary and secondary students. KG kids are just like a white sheet of paper. So do you have a pyramid structure of national education? Now for secondary students, they might have misunderstanding about the country because of the epidemic. They didn't get the opportunity to visit the mainland. So will you arrange for visits to the Hong Kong garrison, for instance, or will you cooperate with the country's Ministry of Education to make up for this shortfall? Under the principle of patriots ruling Hong Kong, I'm sure all 90 legislators here will score A+ in terms of patriotism. When it comes to school principals, school managers and parents, how will they score in terms of patriotism? You do not need to answer this question directly, but they may not all of them may be patriotic enough. Now, legislators have been to different national studies tours to understand more about the country. Will you have national studies tours or courses for teachers? Because they are important element of education. The liberal studies subject is well-intentioned, but if teachers have misguided values, and they can hijack the whole subject. Do you have any punishment for school principals, school managers, and parents? For instance, if people have changed what's in the textbook, and they present graphics to students with wrong information, will you penalize them? The first question is how we take care of the different learning needs of students at different levels. Now we have a multi-pronged approach. In addition to different levels according to students' cognitive ability, now we take a very targeted approach. We have competitions and extracurricular activities in schools. For instance, we have flag raising ceremonies, and the focus of the activity would differ at different levels. As regards how we can ensure that schoolmasters and school managers are patriots. The sense of national identity and patriotism is an important requirement, and understanding about the country and love for the country. Now, teachers are role models. If they do not have this value, it's hard for them to teach their students. So this is an important requirement of teachers. Now, for teachers that fail to fulfill these requirements, for individual bad apples who deliberately misguide their students, now we have taken those cases very seriously, and some teachers were disqualified in serious cases, and some were given verbal or written warnings depending on the severity of their mistakes. Do you have statistics? Well, we have already given such figures a number of times to the education panel. If I remember correctly, we had 300 odd cases, and 2 teachers were disqualified as a result, and some were given either a written or verbal warning or reprimand. And for newly recruited teachers, for instance, if a teacher changed another school, the school will have to ask whether there is such a previous record, and schools will have to check with us whether newly recruited teachers have such a record, and a candidate will have to declare whether he has received previous sanctions and declare to the school. Now, I think we have covered all members in the first round. We have had all the time we need. I first want to announce that the meeting will be extended by 15 minutes because 7 members would like to ask questions in the second round. And if we have follow-up questions, we can also ask follow-up questions to see whether we find this discussion sufficient, or whether we need to follow up on this item. If we have received all the supplementary information from the administration, we're satisfied, then we don't have to have a follow-up meeting. Now, I have stressed a number of times that this is a working committee. We want to make suggestions on the operational aspects. 7 members in the second round. The first is Dr. Chow Man Kwong, 2 minutes each as a start, okay? Thank you, Chair. The Secretary mentioned mentioned sanctions. Recently, we have this Shiu K creative schools. They hanged 2 national flags upside down. You cannot really pass it off as pure negligence. I think it is difficult because this is the Hong Kong Institute of Contemporary Culture Li Shiu K Arts Center. Now, for the use of national flag and national emblem, prior approval by the Director of Administration is required. Many primary and secondary schools will do this. Can we streamline the approval procedures so that the teachers will not be deterred from using the national flag and national emblem for fear of to avoid the trouble? Now, when we receive the case, we in the first instance require the school to rectify the situation, and we've required the school to give us a detailed report, and we'll take follow-up action depending on the report. We'll ask how the school is going to tackle that problem. As regards the application procedures for using the national emblem and national flag, we will see how sufficient support can be given to teachers so that schools can use such items without affecting the solemnity of these items. All right. I think please be detailed and direct in answering members' questions. Mr. Stanley Ng, thank you. I'd like to follow up on two things. First, this paper from the administration is I want the Bureau to be clearer. We have guidelines to schools. How do you assess the effectiveness of such materials? Is there any inadequacy? Have they achieved your objectives? If you can tell us, then we can be more specific in our approach, because we want to be result-oriented. We want to target the problems, so we have to find out the problems. And I'd like to ask about the citizenship and social development subject used to replace a liberal studies subject. I was told that both teachers and students do not take this subject seriously because the passing rate is over 90%, and teachers and students are not too serious about learning and teaching this subject. We expect this subject to be effective. We do not want it to be a dispensable subject. On assessing the effectiveness, I think we have another dedicated meeting to discuss this in greater details. And the situation of using CS to replace liberal studies, we have made some initial observations. We do not motivate schools simply using an examination. So Mrs. Hong can supplement. Yes, many people are worried that the implementation of the subject may depart from the original objectives. So we have done some class observation to see the state of preparedness of schools in this transition. All professional staff, directorate officers have to go on class observation so the people can take this subject seriously. We have visited 20 schools, and we've organized a sharing with school principals and also school supervisors. We have singled out unacceptable examples. We told them categorically that such examples were not acceptable, so that principals and superintendents could not use the excuse that they did not know. And we've also got another sharing session with a panel or head of panels. Because our teachers should feel accountable. After all, we cannot go to each and every school because of school-based management. But then schools will have to be held accountable. So when it comes to constitutional order, we will require schools to keep records for 2 years, so teachers are not allowed to interpret this section on their own. And we have to ensure that the education sector has got this message, and they must not take this subject lightly. Ms. Chan has showed us some pamphlets and materials. Perhaps they can be distributed to members prior to the meeting next time so that we can put questions to you. And perhaps colleagues can take a look at those teaching materials and see whether there are things we have to point out. We have to consider such teaching materials very carefully. Now, I'd like to comment on the preventive aspect.
Members, well, look at complaints from parents or tip-ups from parents or complaints from the public before we would refer cases to Education Bureau. We hope to see that, well, we can take preventive measures as well, not just acting on complaints. That is how are you monitoring schools or school sponsoring bodies? And how do they monitor their frontline teaching staff, whether from dissemination of knowledge, materials used, that no rules are broken? So if you have any data in relation to that or figures, you can let us know. How many schools have corrected what sorts of problems that they came across in the process? So please do let us know. There must be problems that occurred, and we need to know whether the problems are corrected and whether your mechanism has helped prevent potential problems and that teachers are not distorting knowledge. Or have any teachers been found to be ineligible for teaching? We need to know information on that, because with what happened, the major event in 2019, we need to rectify the mechanism, and you need to show us that whether you take the initiatives or not, or whether you are in a passive position, that is acting on complaints or not, how you have addressed the issue. So we do hope that you can provide us with more information on your concrete follow-up action. And just now, Secretary, you said we're going to have a meeting on CS. Do you mean our subcommittee or what? Can you clarify? Yes, I was saying that the National Security Education Effectiveness Assessment, we were talking about that, not CS. At the education panel, we discussed the CS already. So, Chairman, you mentioned about teaching materials. Basically, Dr. Chen mentioned the various topics which are actually accessible online. And so in our annex, we have listed the QR codes of those topics. And so you can see the videos and the other materials related to the topics. So, LegCo members, if your assistants want to see them, it's very convenient for you. And also for prevention, as Mrs. Hong said, we need to let people know what they are supposed to do, give them very clear guidelines. And in terms of national security education, we also give timely responses to schools. So as suggested by members, we are trying to take a preventive approach and not just act on complaints alone. We try to strengthen our preventive measures for schools. Well, I have a higher expectation. Well, you've told schools what they should do, but you need to know what their feedback is. You need to follow up on, after you've briefed them, what is their feedback. So that can be a basis of your communication with schools as well. Because if schools tell you that there's no problem at all, then they may be hiding something. So we want to know whether improvements have been made as a result of your interference. Well, I have got 4 more members who like to speak. I would extend this meeting by 15 more minutes so that the 4 members can ask their questions. Next one is Dennis Leung. Well, one question was not answered. In the Apostle, I suggested you carry out some opinion surveys, continuous surveys to collect data. You haven't answered me on that. And secondly, I was asking you how many talks has the Bureau held on that is. Well, I was asking you actually, have you organized any talks to help schools learn about the thinking of President Xi Jinping and also Master Some Leninism so teachers can learn more? We have this idea of professional development for teachers. So if you hadn't done that, please let me know. If you're going to or considering providing the training for schools, let us know. You have an answer, given me an answer on that. And also, recent history, modern history, contemporary history, have you given them training in them to teachers? If you hadn't provided this training, would you consider introducing it to teachers? I'm not asking for you to organize talks on special occasions every year, but I rather want to know, have you thought about providing continuous learning on an annual basis for teachers to learn the above, what I just mentioned? Have you got any concrete learning and the teachers are aware that they need to learn them so that they can provide more concrete ideas to students and to help the students establish their sense of national identity and also protect the nation? Secretary, let me address on the parcel. I will ask Mrs. Hong to answer you. And on whether we have offered training before 2020, you all know that our national education, what happened to national education? It's since the promulgation of national security law that we had the room. Before 2020, my impression is that we didn't provide any of the training you mentioned. The training mentioned by Dennis Lau. As for modern history, contemporary history, training for teachers, that's important. I think in the days ahead we would try to enrich the content of teacher training materials so that, as President Xi said, that we can have a stable development and implementation of one country, two systems. So we will beef up our teacher training. On a parcel, well, it has been used for many years and it needs to be updated. We are updating the assessment of that, but it's not used to assess how good the students are performing, but rather it is intended to help schools see in its planning work whether it's done well or not. For the longitudinal study, during this time of updating, we would relay the views to the group during the study. A parcels system is pretty good. I hope that the Education Bureau will not waste this system since you can use it. Now we're talking about the use of big data. And we can have any means to help set right goals for students. We should make good use of a parcel. Next one is Benson Look. Thank you, Chairman. Well, additional questions on homeschool cooperation. The key points for discussion for this committee is that in relation to national education, point 4 is about encouraging parents. I think the emphasis is on parents and other stakeholders to take part in education, in the children's education. In today's paper, paragraph 24, out of 24 paragraphs, only one paragraph 18, is on homeschool cooperation. Can the Bureau tell us more? Tell the subcommittee know better. What is the current situation of homeschool cooperation? Just now, Secretary said that in the homeschool cooperation grant, what elements are covered by the grant in relation to national education? So maybe the Bureau can give us a supplementary paper on the effects and the situation of homeschool cooperation. And also, secondly, Just now, many members have mentioned President Xi's speech at different times during his visit to Hong Kong. That could be incorporated into the curriculum, but that would not happen overnight, instantly, because you need to keep updating the curriculum. But just now, the Secretary said that in the important speech on July 1st, various sharing sessions have been held, and maybe more will be held. Can the Bureau ensure that each teacher and student at least would have one chance of attending or listening to the sharing sessions? If the government has KPI, that would be an important KPI. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Look. We can give you the supplementary information after meeting in writing. President Xi's speech. I believe that principals and some middle management staff, after they've attended the sessions, they can share them at staff meeting with teachers. Thank you. Students, it's important to share them with students. Any chance of students listening to that at their assembly, daily assemblies? I think within school, through various channels, students would be exposed to the speech. I believe that teachers, students, parents should have been aware of what President Xi has said. Well, after we receive information from them, we can see what follow-up we can do. One more point. The talks, the sharing sessions, they will also be videoed, and even if schools can't convey the ideas, we can also get schools to play the tape or recordings of the session in school. I think what Mr. Look meant was that he hoped that at least students can be exposed to at least one of those learning sharing sessions. You just put it online, that may not, you don't know whether the students would really listen to it. So he wanted to find out, whether parents, students really can, have heard of it. It's not just about putting them online alone. Yeah, we will distribute the recordings, the videos to schools. If you distribute them to schools, but members, I think, want to know whether you would recommend the organizing of workshops so students, teachers can hear. What was that? I think that's what Mr. Look meant. Yeah, point taken. I'm sure you don't have it seems like you haven't done the recording yet, but you can think of what to do with it. Next one, Chu Kok Kang. National education to teachers and schools is still something new. National security education, and also the coordinators of that subject may find it difficult to do what they should do because they haven't received relevant training. And the coordinators, particularly for the legal aspect, they have very little knowledge about it. Some even, younger teachers, well, they don't know whether they don't have the professional knowledge, and they don't know how they should get about promoting national security education. So would the Bureau consider organizing 5-week training session for those teachers? Or PFMCD or PSMCD courses to let teachers attend an afternoon session on the topic? And would you make it compulsory that a coordinator of national security education must be, in primary and secondary schools must be at senior level? And kindergarten is having a labor shortage, so the EDB has increased requirements for kindergartens. Don't think that implementing national education is something simple in kindergartens. To have quality education, it involves lots of resources and manpower. But it's important to train schools at an early age. When they're 3-year-old, when they can be patriotic, then that will have a lifelong impact on the kids. So would you, for kindergartens and nursery centers, create the posts of executive officers to share the load and also to create room so that more room can be available for development of national education? And also at universities, teacher training and training of vice chancellors or training of principals offered by universities. How are you going to beef up the training to prepare them for implementing national security education?
Secretary, the first question was how in the future we're going to enhance the professional capacity in the coordination of national education in schools. The teaching union and some other organizations have said that national education require interdisciplinary cooperation, and we need to enhance the mobilization. And if we have a middle-ranking leadership, that is better than just relying on teachers. So we encourage schools to make good use of their boosted manpower capacity in the middle management, and they should also enhance the professional capacity of teachers responsible for coordinating national education. That would include training and teaching materials. And now we will consider the overall needs of teachers before we finalize our work. And as for KGs, we maintain very close liaison with KGs. Under the new KG scheme, which has been put in place for 3 years or so, well, just last year we completed an overall review of KGs. We will closely monitor the situation of KGs. And in universities and training of teachers, now we have maintained very close liaison with universities. Now with the introduction of national security education, teacher training has also enhanced. So we have to catch up with times. In schools, now if senior masters are responsible for coordination, that is not good enough. It is not enough to expect teachers to take on such a mammoth task. I tend to agree. If you ask the frontline teachers of schools to do it, they may not have an overview of how to present some of the subject materials. Now, for universities, we will have the opportunity to discuss this subject. Ms. Lilian Kwok, thank you. I agree very much with Mr. Zhu when it comes to teacher training, because I have received inquiries from school principals whether their middle-ranking teachers do not have to be responsible for coordination of national education, thinking that the task can be deferred to frontline teachers. I understand that some schools have got workshops, and that is very professional and useful. So will you enhance training in this regard? In particular, you should invite legal heavyweights to provide training. You can liaise with the Department of Justice, or you can ask the teacher to help to fill up the legal background. I think this is very important. And secondly, the curriculum itself. Now, the Chinese struggle against Japanese invasion, for instance. What about the roles of played by veteran soldiers in the Dongjiang guerrilla force? They have contributed and sacrificed a lot in defense of Hong Kong. that will enhance students' understanding of patriotism. Thirdly, I know that you regular such materials on a regular basis, but on development of the country, our country is developing very quickly, but our curriculum has failed to catch up with new developments. Can you expedite the updating of such materials so that our students can have an updated understanding of the latest development of the country? So can you do this on a regular basis? Secretary, thank you very much. I thank Ms. Kwok for her suggestion. On teacher training in national and national education security education, yes, we can enhance training as the need arises. And we're grateful to the Secretary for Justice and the legal sector for supporting our activities, which are of great help to teachers. And as for the curriculum, I'm sure colleagues have heard your comments already. We're seeing how we can further enhance the content of the curriculum. As regards regular update, we will first enrich the materials first because they can be of immediate help to teachers. The curriculum itself is a framework. The major themes are already there. What we do is to enrich the content. We will enhance the development of materials to catch up with new developments. Thank you very much. We have spent more than 2.5 hours on the subject. We have had a very thorough discussion. This subcommittee has this very clear purpose, and that will be reflected in our final report. So, in our report, if there are very clear recommendations for follow-up, I will also mention names of members who made such recommendations for future reference. We come from different backgrounds. The relevant authorities attaches a lot of importance to this subcommittee. So the specific recommendations will be set out very clearly for the government to follow up. Secondly, I'd like to say this to the Bureau. Please don't mind if I am very specific because I'm already thinking how the reporter should be compiled. Now, you mentioned a series of teaching materials already uploaded to the internet. Now, you do a survey. Please name the teaching materials or teaching kits most commonly used by schools. And then, because our manpower capacity is also limited, but please tell us the most popular teaching kits and materials, and we may ask our staff to review them. It's just like my teaching. I have a long list of reference books, but I know which are more popular among my students. So please give us some statistics for reference. As I said, we have to complete our work by April so that we have time to write up the report by May. It's always difficult to make a start, and for KGs, we should place emphasis on parents who are also young people. please tell us how you can use a soft approach to buy in parents of KGs. In fact, KG parents are still very young. So I hope you can follow up on this. And I wanted to ask a question on this, but time is limited. And you said that national security will base on the discussion of our last discussion in the in the education panel. Now, will you give us a supplementary paper? Because I am very pragmatic and operational. Now, if you want us to quote from your last paper given to the education panel on national education, I will quote from it in my report. If you have anything to add, you may consider giving us another paper. And you give us more information to follow up. Lastly, should we just call it patriotic education or national identity? I'm so undecided. Will you consider the suggestion by Mr. Benson Look? I'm undecided in this regard, but you may respond on this point from the perspective of education, whether it will be better if you use a soft approach and the current situation of parents. If you think that our suggestion may not give the best result, you can tell us whether we should call it national identity or patriotic education. Which one is better? So I have made clear to members our follow-up work so that we can be better prepared for the next topic. And as needed, I'm not going to follow up on this topic. And then during the summer recess, we will have enough time to study this issue. Now we have had ample discussion of this item. I must commend both sides for good preparation for the topic. All right. If you have any information that can be given to us ahead of the next meeting, do let us have it so that our report can be substantive. I thank members. I appreciate your participation. I have been a member of the education panel for a long time, and this time I think our discussion has been very constructive. We do not just point fingers. The report will be published to the community. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.